My name is Lauren Matthews. I'm 31 years old, and this story begins not on the day of the wedding, but a few months earlier, when my sister Danielle got engaged. She's 28, beautiful in that effortless way that makes people gravitate toward her. Shiny blonde hair, a laugh like champagne bubbles, and parents who never hesitated to tell the world she was their golden child. I was used to being second place, the background character in my own family, but I thought by adulthood it would sting less. I was wrong. When Danielle announced her engagement to Michael, my parents practically rolled out the red carpet. They popped champagne, talked about venues and flowers, and within days they were scheduling brunches with his family. I was happy for her. I really was, but I couldn't help noticing that my own milestones had never been met with such enthusiasm. When I got my first real job after college, my parents didn't even come to the small celebration my friends threw. When I moved into my first apartment, my mom's only comment was, "Well, it's not in the best neighborhood, but I guess it'll do." But Danielle? Every step she took was treated like a coronation. Still, I wanted to be supportive. I threw myself into helping Danielle plan. I offered to run errands, to help with invitations, to take photos at dress fittings. She smiled, thanked me, and then turned to Mom and Dad for the real decisions. I tried not to let it bother me. After all, it was her wedding, not mine. Then came the money talk. We were sitting around my parents' dining table, Danielle, Mom, Dad, and me. My parents were discussing the budget with Danielle and Michael, and it became clear quickly that this wasn't just about flowers and photographers. "Well," my dad said proudly, "Danielle, your mother and I will be covering the big expenses. And your sister Lauren has already offered her gift." I blinked, confused. "My gift?" Mom smiled tightly. "Yes, honey. The $15,000 you said you'd be giving toward the wedding." The room tilted. My heart dropped into my stomach. "Excuse me?" I said. Danielle's eyes lit up. "Oh my God, Lauren. Are you serious? That's incredible." I looked between my parents, utterly speechless. $15,000? I didn't even have $15,000. I worked as a graphic designer at a mid-sized firm. My rent chewed up most of my paycheck, and whatever was left went to bills, student loans, and maybe a little into savings. I'd scraped together maybe $500 for a wedding gift, and that was already stretching me thin. I opened my mouth to correct them, but the look my mother shot me was dagger-sharp, warning me to stay silent. "Yes," she said, her smile never wavering. "Lauren wanted to surprise you, Danielle. Isn't it generous?" I sat there frozen, my cheeks burning. Danielle jumped up to hug me, squealing about how amazing I was. I hugged her back stiffly, my mind racing. Why would my parents do this? Why would they lie? That night, I called my mom. "What the hell was that?" I demanded. She sighed like I was the one being difficult. "Lauren, don't make this a big deal. Danielle's wedding is important. We wanted her to feel supported, and saying you contributed a big amount, it makes you look good too." "Look good?" "Mom, I don't have that kind of money." "Well, then find a way to get it," she snapped. "Take a loan if you have to. This is your sister's big day." I hung up in tears, my chest tight with rage and helplessness. Over the next few weeks, the lie grew legs. Danielle told Michael's family, who then praised me every time we crossed paths. "So generous," his mother said, patting my hand. "You must really love your sister." My coworkers even heard through the grapevine. Apparently my parents had bragged to relatives, who told others. Suddenly, everyone thought I was this wealthy, giving older sister. Inside, I was crumbling. I confronted my dad about it once. "Dad, you have to stop this. People think I gave Danielle $15,000. I can't." He cut me off, his tone icy. "Lauren, don't embarrass your mother. Just let it go. You've always been so difficult. Can't you do this one thing for your sister?" Difficult. That word stabbed deep. It was the word they'd used my whole life. Difficult when I asked questions. Difficult when I didn't get perfect grades like Danielle. Difficult when I wanted attention. For weeks, I wrestled with what to do. I even considered taking out a personal loan just to keep the lie alive. That's how twisted it all felt. I was ready to put myself in debt just to avoid disappointing everyone, to avoid proving my parents right when they called me selfish. but something in me hardened. I couldn't do it. I wouldn't. The night before the wedding, Danielle sat with me in the bridal suite. She was glowing, her blonde hair in rollers, sipping champagne. "Lauren," she said softly, "I just wanted to say thank you again. I know 15,000 is a lot, and I didn't expect it, but it means the world to me. You're the best sister ever." My throat ached. She didn't know. She wasn't in on the lie. She genuinely believed I'd done this incredible thing for her. And here I was, letting her float into her wedding day on a cloud built from deceit. I couldn't live with it. That's when I knew. I wasn't going to take a loan. I wasn't going to scrape together savings I didn't have. And I wasn't going to stay silent. The wedding reception would be my moment. If my parents wanted to use my name to shine, then I would use my own voice to tell the truth. And not just the truth about the money, the truth about everything. I lay awake that night rehearsing the words, my heart racing. Would Danielle hate me forever? Would Michael's family despise me? Would my parents disown me? Maybe. But for once, I was willing to risk it, because I was done being the background character. The next day, as I slipped into my dress and walked toward the reception hall, I knew I wasn't giving the speech anyone expected. The morning of the wedding was a blur of satin dresses, perfume, and nerves. The bridal suite buzzed with energy, makeup artists rushing in and out, hair dryers humming, bridesmaids laughing too loudly as they sipped mimosas. I stood in front of a mirror, adjusting the straps of my navy blue bridesmaid gown, trying to steady my breathing. Danielle sat in the center of it all, radiant in her white lace gown, surrounded by people fussing over her every detail. She looked like she belonged in a magazine spread, every strand of her blonde hair perfectly curled, her cheeks glowing. She was beautiful, and she knew it. Everyone knew it. I wanted to be happy for her, but I couldn't shake the bitterness curling in my chest. Every time someone clinked a glass and toasted to Danielle's big day, someone else would inevitably add, "And how wonderful of Lauren, giving such a generous gift." It was like a knife twisting deeper with each mention. At one point, Danielle's maid of honor leaned toward me with a knowing grin. "You're such a good sister." $15,000? That's insane. I don't think I could ever do that for my sibling. I forced a smile, my lips tight. Yeah, insane. Inside, I was screaming. When Mom arrived in the room, she looked elegant in her shimmering mauve gown, her pearl necklace catching the light. She kissed Danielle's cheek, whispered something sweet to her, and then her eyes met mine across the room. Her smile shifted, sharp and knowing, the kind of smile that wasn't joy but control. In that instant, I knew she wasn't ashamed of what she'd done. She was proud. She thought she'd pulled off the perfect performance, using me as a prop in Danielle's fairy tale. I looked away, my stomach churning. The ceremony itself was beautiful. A small chapel decorated with white roses, sunlight streaming through stained glass windows. Danielle glided down the aisle on Dad's arm while the guests sighed and whispered. Michael cried as he read his vows, and Danielle's voice broke when she promised forever. I stood at the front, bouquet in hand, and wondered if anyone could see the storm behind my forced smile. My parents sat in the front pew, glowing with pride, their eyes occasionally flicking toward me like they were daring me to ruin their perfect day. I didn't. Not yet. The reception hall sparkled with string lights and crystal glasses. Tables were draped in ivory linens, centerpieces overflowing with orchids and lilies. A live band played softly as guests mingled, clinking glasses and snapping photos. I tried to blend into the background, sipping champagne too quickly, but the life followed me everywhere. "Lauren, you've outdone yourself," Michael's mother gushed as she hugged me tightly. "What a gift. I told my husband we need to raise our son's sister to be just like you." I laughed weakly, my stomach twisting. Later, one of Danielle's bridesmaids leaned over and whispered, "You must make so much money as a designer to be able to just hand over 15 grand like that." I wanted to shout, "No, I don't. I can barely cover rent some months." Instead, I smiled and muttered, "I save a lot." Every word of praise felt like another brick pressing against my chest. Then came the worst moment. Dinner had just been served, perfectly plated salmon with roasted vegetables. Glasses clinked, people cheered, and Dad stood to give his toast. He spoke warmly about Danielle, about Michael, about love and family. Then he turned his eyes toward me. "And, of course," he said, his voice booming with pride, "we cannot forget Danielle's incredible sister, Lauren. Not only has she been a rock throughout this whole planning process, but she also gave a truly astonishing gift, $15,000 to support her sister's wedding. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what family is all about." The room erupted in applause. All eyes turned toward me. I sat there frozen, my cheeks flaming, my hands trembling under the table. Some people even stood, clapping and raising their glasses to me. Danielle's eyes shimmered with tears as she mouthed, "Thank you." And in that moment, I knew I couldn't stay silent. I couldn't let the lie cement itself forever. I couldn't let my parents paint me as something I wasn't just to feed their own egos. And most importantly, I couldn't let Danielle believe a fairy tale that wasn't real. Because one day, when the truth came out, and lies always have a way of surfacing, it wouldn't be my parents who paid the price. It would be me. Danielle would hate me, resent me, maybe even cut me out of her life. No. If I was going to lose her, it had to be for the truth, not for the lie. When the applause died down, the band played a soft tune, and people returned to their meals. I pushed food around my plate, my mind racing. My heart hammered in my chest. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. The DJ tapped the microphone. "All right, everyone, it's time for the maid of honor speech." My legs felt like lead as I stood. Danielle's eyes glowed with excitement, Michael's with warmth. My parents looked at me with thin smiles, smug and expectant. I took the microphone, my hands trembling slightly, and stepped to the center of the room. The chatter quieted. Dozens of faces turned toward me. For a moment, I almost froze. The urge to just smile, say something nice, and sit down was strong. That was what I'd always done. Keep the peace, swallow the pain. But then I saw my mother's face, that proud, calculating smirk. And I remembered Danielle's whispered gratitude in the bridal suite, how she believed in a gift that wasn't real. I lifted the microphone to my lips, my voice steady. I had planned to stand here tonight and talk about love, about family, and about how happy I am for Danielle and Michael. And I am happy. But before I go on, I need to clear something up. The room stirred. My parents stiffened. There's been a lot of talk tonight about a gift. About me giving Danielle $15,000. And I want to be honest with you all. That isn't true. Gasps rippled through the room. Danielle's smile faltered. My dad's face turned to stone. My mother's eyes blazed with silent fury. I swallowed hard and continued. I wish I could give Danielle that kind of gift, I really do. But the truth is, I don't have that kind of money. I never promised it. I never said it. And I won't take credit for something I didn't do. The silence was deafening. I looked at Danielle directly. What I can give you is something different. My honesty. My loyalty. My love as your sister. And tonight, that's the gift I want to give. Because marriage isn't built on lies or appearances. It's built on truth. And you deserve nothing less. I lowered the microphone, my hands shaking, my heart pounding in my ears. The room was frozen in shock. And in that silence, I felt the weight lift off my chest for the first time in months. The silence after my speech was almost unbearable. You could hear the clink of a fork dropped 2 tables over, the shuffle of someone shifting uncomfortably in their chair. My chest burned as I stood there, clutching the microphone, forcing myself to breathe. Then, a sound broke the tension. Someone clapped. Just once, sharp and loud. Then another person joined. Soon, a small pocket of applause trickled through the hall, awkward and hesitant, like people weren't sure if they should cheer or shrink into the floor. But what hit me harder was Danielle's face. Her smile had collapsed. Her eyes, those bright, champagne bubble eyes, were filled with shock. And worse, betrayal. "Lauren," she whispered, just loud enough for me to hear over the uneasy chatter. I wanted to run to her, to explain, but my mother's hiss cut through the air before I could move. "Sit down. Now." Her voice was low, sharp, and laced with venom. I handed the microphone back to the DJ with trembling hands and returned to my seat. My father's jaw was set, his knuckles white as he gripped his wine glass. My mother's face was a mask of icy rage, her smile plastered on for the crowd, but her eyes promising retribution. I sat stiffly, my pulse hammering. As dinner resumed, whispers swirled around the tables. I caught snippets. "Did you hear that? She said it wasn't true. Why would her parents lie about something like that? Poor Danielle." Michael leaned toward Danielle, his hand on hers, whispering something in her ear. Danielle nodded numbly, but her gaze kept darting toward me, wounded and questioning. The band struck up a tune to distract the guests, but I could feel the tension radiating from my family's table like a heat wave. When the plates were cleared, Mom leaned close, her words sharp enough to slice through bone. "How dare you embarrass us like that? Do you realize what you've done?" I met her gaze, my voice low but firm. "I told the truth. That's all." "The truth," she hissed. "The truth could have waited until after the wedding. Instead, you humiliated your sister. You humiliated us." Dad finally spoke, his tone quieter, but no less heavy. "You've always had a flair for drama, Lauren. Always had to make everything about you. Tonight was supposed to be about Danielle. And you ruined it." The words hit like punches. I wanted to defend myself, to scream that they had created this lie, not me. But before I could, Danielle stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Lauren, outside. Now." The guests murmured as I followed her out of the reception hall, my legs shaky, my stomach twisting. We found ourselves in a quiet corridor lined with framed photos of past weddings at the venue. The muffled music from the reception bled through the doors, but out here, it was just us. Danielle turned to me, her face pale, her eyes flashing. "Why would you do that? Why would you humiliate me on my wedding day?" My throat tightened. "Danielle, I didn't want to humiliate you. I wanted to tell the truth. Mom and Dad lied. I never promised you $15,000. I don't even have that kind of money." Her eyes widened. "Wait, what? They made it up. They told everyone." I tried to correct them, but they wouldn't listen. "They told me to take out a loan, Danielle. A loan. Just so I wouldn't embarrass them." She blinked rapidly, her face shifting between confusion, anger, and hurt. "So, it wasn't you? It was them?" "Yes," I said, my voice breaking. "I would never promise something like that and not follow through. I wanted to get you a gift, but 15,000? I couldn't. And they knew it. They used me to make themselves look good. And I couldn't stand there and let everyone believe a lie." Danielle pressed her hand to her forehead, her veil trembling slightly. "Oh my God." The silence stretched. Finally, she lowered her hand, her eyes brimming with tears. "Why wouldn't they just tell me the truth?" "Because they care more about appearances than honesty," I said bitterly. "They always have. You're their golden child, Danielle. And me? I'm just the disappointment they try to dress up when it suits them." Her lips parted, as if to argue, but then she closed them. Her eyes softened with something like recognition. "Lauren." For the first time in years, she looked at me not with superiority, but with understanding. When we returned to the hall, the tension was thick. My parents were waiting near the door, their faces carved from stone. Mom's voice was a hiss. "You told her, didn't you?" Danielle's voice, though quiet, cut sharper than any knife. "Yes. She told me, and I believe her." Gasps rippled through the nearby guests. Mom's face twisted with fury, but Danielle turned on her, her voice rising. "How could you? How could you lie like that? On my wedding day?" The music faltered as heads turned. The band stopped playing altogether. Mom's mouth opened and closed, searching for words, but Dad stepped forward, his voice stern. "Danielle, calm down. We were only trying to make everything perfect for you. You should be thanking us." Danielle's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Perfect? You call us perfect? You've humiliated me more than Lauren ever could. You lied to me, to Michael, to everyone here." Michael stepped up beside her, his arm protectively around her shoulders. His gaze was firm as it settled on my parents. This is not how a family should behave.
Not today.
Not ever. The crowd murmured louder now, whispers turning into waves. My mother's face blanched as she realized control had slipped from her grasp. And for the first time, I felt the scales tipping. The truth wasn't crushing me anymore. It was setting me free. The rest of the evening unraveled quickly. Guests avoided my parents, whispering behind their backs. Danielle stuck close to Michael, her eyes flashing with fury whenever she caught sight of Mom or Dad. And me? For the first time all night, I breathed easily. Because even though the night was messy, even though it wasn't the fairy tale my parents had scripted, it was real. And real was something I could finally live with. But I knew this was just the beginning. The fallout from that night wouldn't end with whispers in a ballroom. It would follow us all long after the last dance was over. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what came next. The reception after my confession never recovered. The music eventually picked back up, the waiters brought out dessert, and the open bar kept people busy, but the atmosphere had shifted. Every laugh sounded forced, every toast strained. My parents sat stiffly at their table, their smiles frozen masks, while guests avoided their gaze. I stayed close to Danielle and Michael. She hadn't fully processed everything, I could tell. Her face kept tightening with disbelief whenever she glanced at our parents, but she didn't push me away. That alone was a relief. At one point, during the father-daughter dance, I caught sight of Mom's glare across the room. Her eyes burned into me like fire. I almost expected her to march over, microphone in hand, and spin another story to save face. But for once, she stayed seated. Maybe even she knew there was no salvaging this. When the music ended, Danielle came to me, her cheeks flushed from dancing. "Lauren," she said quietly, "I want you to know, I don't blame you. Not anymore. I'm angry, yes, but not at you." The words nearly broke me. My throat tightened as I whispered, "Thank you." But then she added, "I just don't understand them. Why would they think lying would help? Why would they put you in that position?" I shook my head, because for them, it's always about appearances. About being the perfect family, no matter the cost. And I was the easiest one to sacrifice. Her eyes glistened. "You didn't deserve that." No, I didn't. And hearing her say it out loud was both painful and healing. Later that night, when most guests had gone, our family gathered in a smaller side room where coats and gifts were kept. It was meant to be a quiet moment to say goodbyes before Danielle and Michael left for their honeymoon. Instead, it turned into something else entirely. Mom closed the door behind us with a sharp click. She turned to me, her voice low and trembling with rage. "You selfish little girl. Do you realize the damage you've done tonight?" Dad stood beside her, his arms crossed. "You humiliated us in front of everyone, Lauren. Your own sister's wedding. Do you have any idea how many people will be talking about this?" I felt my hands shaking, but I didn't back down. "Do you hear yourselves? You lied. You created this mess. All I did was tell the truth." Mom's eyes narrowed. "You could have kept quiet. You could have let Danielle have her moment. But no, you had to make it about you like you always do." Danielle's voice cracked through the tension.
"No, Mom.
"Stop. This isn't about Lauren. This is about you and Dad lying to me. Lying to Michael. Lying to everyone." "Sweetheart," Dad began, his tone softening in that patronizing way, "we only wanted the best for you. We wanted everything to be perfect." Danielle shook her head furiously. "Perfect? At the expense of my sister's dignity? At the expense of the truth? You don't get to use perfection as an excuse for cruelty." Michael stepped forward then, his hand steady on Danielle's back. His voice was calm, but the steel in it was undeniable. "I've tried to be respectful tonight, but this isn't the kind of behavior I want in our marriage or around our future children. If appearances matter more to you than honesty, then you won't have a place in our lives." The room went silent. Mom's face paled, Dad's mouth tightened, and me, for the first time I saw them falter. The confrontation ended not with apologies but with silence. My parents walked out of that side room without another word, their dignity in tatters, their backs rigid with anger. Danielle hugged me tightly before she left with Michael. "I'm sorry for everything," she whispered. "For not seeing it sooner. For letting them treat you that way all these years." Tears stung my eyes as I whispered back, "I'm just glad you see it now." When the newlyweds left, I stood in the empty room, surrounded by gift bags and leftover coats, the echoes of the night swirling around me. I should have felt broken. Instead, I felt lighter. The days after the wedding were chaos. Gossip spread like wildfire. Relatives called me, some praising my courage, others scolding me for ruining such a beautiful day. Co-workers whispered in the break room, their eyes flicking toward me when they thought I couldn't see. My parents didn't call. Not once. But Danielle did. She invited me over, just the two of us. Her apartment smelled like fresh flowers from the leftover wedding arrangements. She sat me down with coffee and after a long silence said, "Growing up, I thought they were just hard on you because you were older. I thought maybe you could handle it better. But now I see they never treated you fairly at all." I stared into my mug, tears blurring my vision. I used to think if I tried harder, if I was more like you, they'd love me the same.
But it was never about me.
It was about the story they wanted to tell. Danielle reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "You don't need their story anymore. You have your own." Her words echoed in my heart long after I left. But my parents weren't done. A week later, I received a message from Mom. Short. Cold. "We need to talk." I didn't respond immediately. For once, I wanted to control the timing. When I finally agreed to meet, it was at their house, a place that had always felt more like a museum of expectations than a home. The moment I walked in, Mom launched into me. "Do you know how much you've embarrassed this family? People are talking, Lauren. Do you have any idea what that means for us?" I laughed bitterly. "You're still worried about what people think? After everything?" Dad stepped in. "We're not the villains here, Lauren. We wanted the wedding to be special. That's all." I stared at them, incredulous. "You used me. You lied in my name. And when I told the truth, you painted me as the problem. Do you hear yourselves?" For a long moment, neither spoke. Their silence was louder than any denial. That was when it hit me. They weren't going to change. Not for me. Maybe not for anyone. And for the first time in my life, I realized I didn't need them to. That night, I walked out of their house feeling free. I knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be awkward holidays, strained gatherings, maybe even permanent cracks in our family. But I also knew I had finally stepped out of the shadow they'd cast over me my entire life. The lie about the $15,000 wasn't just a lie. It was the breaking point. The moment I stopped letting them define me. And though it hurt, though it came with consequences, I didn't regret a single word of that wedding speech. Because for once, I hadn't spoken for them. I'd spoken for me. The weeks after the wedding were like aftershocks from an earthquake. Everywhere I went, I felt the ripples. At work, co-workers would lower their voices when I entered the break room, then pretend they hadn't been talking about me. At the grocery store, I ran into one of Mom's friends who leaned in with a thin smile and said, "Well, I guess honesty isn't always the best policy, I didn't respond. I didn't owe her anything. But the hardest part wasn't the gossip from strangers. It was the phone calls. Relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly had opinions. My Aunt Carla rang one night, her voice dripping with judgment. "Lauren, I know your parents can be particular, but you should have thought about Danielle. It was her day. Couldn't you have just waited?" I gripped the phone, trying to steady my breathing. "Carla, I didn't lie. They did. Should I have just gone into debt to protect their image?" Silence. Then a curt, "Sometimes family requires sacrifice." I hung up before I said something I'd regret. But not everyone condemned me. A few days later, I got a message from my cousin Jenny. "I heard what happened. Took guts. I'm proud of you." I stared at the text for a long time before tears blurred the words. Jenny and I hadn't been close since childhood, but in that moment, her words felt like a lifeline. Then there was Danielle. She called often, sometimes just to vent. Mom keeps blowing up my phone, she said one night, her voice weary. She keeps saying you ruined the wedding. That Michael's parents think less of us now. I swallowed hard. Do they? Danielle paused.
No.
Actually, they said they respected you for being honest. Michael told me he wished more people had that kind of backbone. But Mom can't stand that. She needs to believe she's still in control. I closed my eyes, relief flooding me. Thank you for telling me. Don't thank me, she sighed. Thank yourself. You're the one who finally had the courage to say it out loud. Her words warmed me in a way I didn't expect. For the first time in years, my sister and I were closer, not because of the wedding, but because of the truth. My parents, however, were relentless. One evening, they showed up at my apartment unannounced. I opened the door to see Mom standing rigidly, Dad just behind her. Lauren, Mom said tightly, we need to fix this. People are still talking. The longer this goes on, the worse it looks. I stepped aside reluctantly, letting them in. They sat stiffly on my couch, refusing even to glance at the personal touches of my life. The framed art, the small houseplants I tended with care, the stack of design books on my coffee table. What exactly do you expect me to do? I asked. Dad cleared his throat. You could tell people you misspoke. Say, it was a misunderstanding. I laughed bitterly. You want me to lie?
Again?
To cover for your lie. Mom's eyes flashed. It wouldn't be a lie. It would be smoothing things over. Protecting the family. I crossed my arms.
No.
I won't do it. You've been protecting your image at my expense my entire life. This ends with me. For a moment, the room was electric with tension. Then Mom stood, her purse clutched like a shield. You're being dramatic. One day you'll regret this. As they left, I felt something shift in me again. They weren't just angry, they were desperate. Their control was slipping, and they knew it. Meanwhile, Danielle and Michael began quietly distancing themselves from my parents. They canceled weekly dinners, skipped calls, and when they did interact, Danielle's tone was sharper, more guarded. Michael says we need boundaries, she told me one afternoon over coffee. And he's right. We can't start our marriage letting them meddle in everything. What happened at the wedding proved that. I nodded. I don't want to come between you and them. You didn't, she said firmly. They did. You just showed me the truth. Hearing her say that was like a bomb. For years, I believed Danielle would always take their side. But now, she was choosing to see me. Not the scapegoat, not the disappointment, just me. Still, the guilt lingered. At night, I'd lie awake, replaying the reception, my parents' fury, Danielle's wounded face. Had I done the right thing? Could I have handled it differently? One night, I dreamed I was back at the microphone, but this time, my voice failed me. I stood there mute, the crowd staring, my parents' smirks triumphant. I woke with my heart pounding, sweat soaking my sheets. The dream left me shaken, but also resolute. I had chosen the harder path, but it was the honest one. Then came the family dinner. A month after the wedding, my grandmother invited everyone over. She wanted, as she put it, to clear the air. The house smelled of roast chicken and apple pie when I walked in. Relatives milled around, their conversations dropping when I entered. My parents sat at the head of the long dining table, their posture stiff, their eyes cold. Danielle and Michael sat together on one side, their hands intertwined. Dinner began quietly. Plates were passed, polite conversation forced. I kept my eyes on my food, bracing for the inevitable. It came when dessert was served. Mom set her fork down with a clatter. I suppose we're just going to pretend nothing happened. That Lauren didn't ruin her sister's wedding. The room fell silent. Danielle's voice cut through, sharp and steady. She didn't ruin it. You did. Gasps echoed around the table. My grandmother's eyes widened, but Danielle pressed on. You lied to everyone. You put her in an impossible position. And she had the courage to stand up. I wish you'd see that instead of blaming her. For the first time, I saw my mother falter. Her mouth opened, then closed. Dad shifted uncomfortably, his usual composure cracking. The silence stretched until Grandma cleared her throat. Enough. This family has been torn apart by lies. It's time to face the truth. Lauren did nothing wrong. Her words landed like a gavel. My chest ached with emotion. After years of invisibility, of being the problem child, someone had finally said it out loud. I wasn't wrong. That night, as I walked home under the streetlights, I felt lighter. The fallout wasn't over. Maybe it would never fully end, but the balance had shifted. For once, the truth wasn't just my burden to carry. Others had taken it up too. And in that, I found strength I didn't know I had. In the weeks after Grandma's dinner, the family dynamic shifted in ways I could never have predicted. My parents, humiliated and cornered, withdrew. They no longer bombarded me with messages or tried to demand that I fix things. Instead, there was silence. Icy, deliberate silence. At first, I thought it would break me. I had lived my whole life chasing their approval, their acknowledgement, even their smallest scraps of affection. Without it, wouldn't I feel empty? Wouldn't I feel even more invisible? But something strange happened. I didn't feel weaker. I felt stronger. For the first time, I woke up without the weight of wondering how to please them. I cooked dinner in my apartment, filled it with the scent of rosemary chicken and garlic bread, and didn't think about whether Mom would scoff at my cooking. I worked late on a design project and didn't feel guilty about not calling Dad to report every accomplishment. I met friends for drinks, laughing until my cheeks ached, and didn't compare myself to Danielle or the perfect image my parents demanded of her. I was living for myself, not for their approval. That's not to say it was easy. There were moments, like when I scrolled through social media and saw Mom posting photos of Danielle and Michael, captions gushing about our perfect daughter's new life. I wasn't mentioned once, not even in the wedding album posts. It was as though they had erased me entirely. It hurt.
Deeply.
But then Danielle would call. I saw Mom's post, she'd say, her voice tired but kind. Don't let it get to you. She's just doubling down because she knows she lost control. Sometimes she'd invite me over for dinner, and Michael would greet me with a warm hug. We'd sit in their small apartment, eating pasta or takeout, laughing about little things. And each time, I felt something I hadn't before, belonging. Not the forced kind, not the conditional acceptance of my parents, but real belonging. Danielle and I were building something new, something honest. Meanwhile, extended families slowly revealed where they stood. Some avoided me altogether, clearly siding with my parents. Others reached out privately. My cousin Jenny visited one afternoon bringing coffee and a box of donuts. I wish I'd spoken up sooner, she admitted, curling her legs under her on my couch. I always saw how they treated you differently, but I told myself it wasn't my place. Watching you stand up at that wedding, it was like watching someone finally break the cycle. Her words warmed me more than she could have known. It became clear that while my parents were losing control, I was gaining something more valuable. My own voice and a small but powerful circle of people who respected it. Then came the invitation. A fancy embossed envelope arrived in my mailbox, addressed in Mom's handwriting. Inside was a single card. Family brunch this Sunday at the house. Attendance expected. I almost laughed at the word expected. It was so like her, still trying to command, still clinging to the illusion of control. For a day, I debated whether to go. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Another part wanted to walk in and prove I wasn't afraid anymore. In the end, I chose the latter. When I arrived, the house smelled of cinnamon rolls and coffee. My parents sat at the table, their postures rigid. Danielle and Michael were already there, their faces wary but calm. Lauren, Dad said coolly. Thank you for coming. Mom's smile was brittle. We wanted to clear the air. I sat, folding my hands in my lap.
All right.
Let's clear it. For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then Mom spoke. We think it's best if we put the wedding incident behind us. People have already forgotten. If we all move forward, there's no reason to dwell on it. My jaw tightened. Move forward? Without accountability? Without acknowledging the lie you told? Dad sighed. It was a mistake. We were trying to give Danielle the wedding she deserved. We didn't think it through. Danielle leaned forward, her voice sharp. It wasn't just a mistake. It was manipulation. And you put Lauren in an impossible position. You need to own that. Mom's lips pressed thin, but she said nothing. For the first time, I felt no fear in that silence. No need to beg for her acknowledgement. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, steady and calm. You don't have to apologize if you don't want to. I'm not waiting for it anymore. But I need you to know this. I won't let you lie in my name ever again. I won't play the role you wrote for me. If that means we see each other less, so be it. The room was still. My parents stared at me like they were looking at a stranger. And maybe they were, because I wasn't the daughter they'd molded through shame anymore. I was someone new. Danielle smiled faintly, pride flickering in her eyes. Michael reached for her hand under the table. And me? I felt free. After that brunch, something final shifted. My parents didn't disown me outright, but the distance became permanent. Calls dwindled. Invitations stopped. Holidays became smaller, Danielle and Michael hosting me there with them. My parents choosing their own separate celebrations. It was strange, grieving the relationship I'd never truly had. But it was also liberating. For once, I wasn't bending myself into pieces to fit their expectations. I wasn't their disappointment or their scapegoat.
I was just me, and that was enough.
One night, months later, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, the city lights glowing in the distance. Danielle had called earlier, telling me she and Michael were expecting their first child. My heart swelled at the thought of becoming an aunt. I thought back to that wedding day, to the way my hands had shaken as I held the microphone. How terrified I had been. How heavy the silence had felt. And yet, that moment had been the start of everything. The start of truth. The start of freedom. The start of finally choosing myself. I smiled into the night, lifting my glass in a quiet toast. To honesty, I whispered. To finally being enough. Time has a way of dulling sharp edges, but not erasing them. Months stretched into a year after Danielle's wedding, and though life carried me forward, the memory of that night never left me. It wasn't the applause or the gasps, or even my mother's glare that haunted me. It was the feeling in my chest when I finally told the truth.
Terrifying.
Liberating. Final. In the aftermath, family lines had redrawn themselves. My parents retreated further into their curated world, where Danielle was still the shining star, and I was, well, nothing at all. I used to think being invisible to them was the worst fate imaginable. But as time passed, I realized invisibility could also mean freedom. Because without their constant disapproval pressing down on me, I had room to breathe. To build a life on my own terms. Danielle and I grew closer than ever. Her pregnancy was a turning point for both of us. She called me almost daily, sometimes to vent about morning sickness, sometimes just to share baby name ideas. For the first time, our conversations weren't shadowed by comparison or parental interference. It was just us, two sisters learning to trust each other, without the filter of mom and dad's favoritism. One afternoon, I was helping her fold baby clothes when she paused, holding up a tiny onesie. You know, she said softly, when Mom told me about that $15,000, I believe her without question. Not because I thought you had that kind of money, but because I thought you were finally trying to earn their love. I didn't realize you'd already been doing that your whole life. Her words hit me like a wave. Danielle, I wanted their love so badly, I would have done anything. But it was never enough. She set the onesie down and gripped my hands. Maybe it's not about being enough for them. Maybe it's about being enough for yourself. That night, I went home and stared at my reflection in the mirror for a long time. For years, I had searched for my parents in that reflection. Would they approve of this hairstyle, this job, this version of me? Now, for the first time, I looked and thought, what do I see? What do I want? The answer was simple. I wanted peace. And I was starting to find it. Of course, the past still had claws. At a cousin's birthday party, I overheard someone mutter, "There's the one who made a scene at the wedding." My cheeks burned, but then Jenny, bless her, turned to them and said, "Or maybe she's the one who finally told the truth. Depends how you look at it." I nearly cried on the spot. Another time, I ran into Mom at the grocery store. She looked me over like I was a stranger, her lips curling faintly before she turned her cart in the opposite direction. It stung, but instead of chasing after her, I let her go. I told myself, her silence is not my failure. It's her choice. The real turning point came at Danielle's baby shower. The room was filled with pastel balloons, laughter, and the scent of cake. I stood near the gift table, watching Danielle open presents, her face glowing. Mom and Dad were there too, of course, but this time the balance was different. When Danielle held up the quilt I had made, stitched late into the night, each square carefully chosen, she burst into tears. "Lauren," she said, hugging it to her chest, "this is the most beautiful gift I've ever received." The room clapped, warm and genuine. And for once, it wasn't about money or appearances or lies. It was about love. I glanced at my parents. Mom's smile was strained, her eyes flicking between Danielle's joy and me. But I didn't care.
This wasn't about them.
It was about me and my sister reclaiming something real. When Danielle's daughter was born, I held her in my arms, her tiny fingers wrapping around mine, and felt something shift in me forever. This little girl would grow up knowing love without conditions. She would know that truth mattered more than appearances, that dignity mattered more than approval. As I rocked her gently, I whispered, "You'll never have to earn love. Not from me." In that moment, I understood. Breaking the cycle wasn't just for me. It was for her. Sometimes I still think about that wedding night, about the way my voice shook at the microphone, the way my parents' faces hardened with fury, the way Danielle's eyes filled with disbelief. I think about how different everything would be if I had stayed silent. I would still be their scapegoat, still twisting myself into knots, desperate for scraps of approval, still trapped in a role I never chose. But I wasn't silent. I spoke. And though it cost me the relationship with my parents, it gave me something better. My freedom, my voice, my self-respect. It gave me back my sister. If you're listening to this and you've ever been compared, belittled, or used by the people who are supposed to love you the most, I want you to hear me. You don't have to keep playing their role. You don't have to keep carrying their lies. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't revenge or reconciliation. It's simply standing up and saying, "Enough. This is who I am. This is what's real." Because the truth, once spoken, can't be buried again. And neither can you.